session. Oh, there, colleagues, I have to keep this. Thank you so much, everyone, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. Mohamed Elsanousi is my name. I am the Executive Director of the Peacemakers Network, and so happy to be with all of you here. So the purpose of this session is to actually I will be standing here and you will be talking. So let's begin with that, and then our good friend Liz is going to help us in taking notes. So we need your recommendations that will be delivered to Professor Marshall and the organizers, and then they will be included in the last recommendations for this conference. So I just to open it up, any volunteer would like to share ideas on the topic of debt and global governance. We already had this discussion during the conference, and we talked a lot about how debt actually impact global governance. We also heard a lot of discussion about how, global north and global south, and how, debt needs to be basically a topic of discussion, and it became an obstacle for prosperity and things like that for particularly certain countries. So anybody would like to start us off this morning? And I guess we have only 30 minutes, I believe, right? 30 minutes for this session, so it's okay, so it's a very quick turnaround here. You want to start? Okay, please. Yeah, you can sit, yes, of course.
So my name is David Munene. I work with the Cutting Hills Network for Environmental Sustainability in Africa, and I also help to facilitate the engagement of accredited organizations to the UNEP in Africa. It's interesting that there is debt and governance. I will skip global because governance tends to be very local for me before it becomes global. I think we will not be able to unpack debt, especially in our context, without looking at how systematically debt has been inflicted upon people who should not be in debt. And I say this in reference especially to this systematized bad governance like colonialism. That before the histories of colonialism, before colonialism was impacted upon many of the countries, those countries did not need debt. As a matter of fact, their way of governance did not require them to be indebted to anybody externally. But in the process of that systematized debt infliction and yoking of countries, then we find ourselves in the place that we are. But number two, that bad governance as well is the same reason why it was easy for people who were previously incorruptible became sort of corruptible, and in the process of it have not been able to manage the little resources that they have left. So we will not be able to have a conversation about debt and a new governance architecture without looking at the root cause of it, which can be traced to such atrocities as slavery and so on. But since we are here now in the 21st century, can we start with repentance? And repentance doesn't look realistic. If I take your phone and I repent for stealing and I have not returned it, how is that repentance? So we must, as well as we are, as much as people are being asked to forgive, it's also important for the others to forego that which they have taken.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You made an important point. You touch upon historical grievances, we call them that way, and colonizations and things like that, and all of this, and how we can overcome all of that, and forgiveness and repentance. So these are very important points. Anyone else would like to share? Yes, Bye-bye, Mark. Welcome, David. Nice to see you.
Hi, Richard Marker. Just to put a context, while I'm here in my role as a leader in the interreligious realm, my professional work is in the philanthropy world.
Right.
And I spend a good deal of time on the international philanthropy sector. So One of the things that's important on our agenda is the entire issue of sovereign debt, local debt, and how it's authentically, and what kind of legitimacy there is to it. And one of the things that I want to make a distinction is the different levels of debt and the ways in which we in the religious communities can impact that. And one of the things is what we might call micro debt, which can be impacted on a very local level and can have an impact for people to be exempted from the big multinational corporations and banks that can extract it. And that's a role that religious institutions can play, I think, on a very local level. In addition to that, on a much larger level, there are, I'm just going to give an example from the Jewish world, but one that I think has application, and that is what we might call free loan societies, where the communities, right?
Yes, I'm very aware of it.
The free loan societies where the communities themselves organize and take responsibility for making sure that money is recirculated within the community without it, and especially for the most vulnerable populations. On the global level, however, we have, I want to respond a little bit to the last comment. I absolutely agree with it, but I think we have, as the religious communities, we have to hold accountable both the government and the multinational corporations for ethical standards in the way in which they establish debt. Sovereign debt is, especially with the removal of aid, of USA aid, and the equivalent around the world, sovereign debt is burdensome in a way that it wasn't before. And it's impacting individuals in a way that it wasn't before because of the billions of dollars that are not available to take care of human need. We in the religious world need to hold governments accountable both on the national level, and because many of our communities, such as the Catholic Church and the Ecumenical Patriarch and others are multinational, we have a responsibility to hold the national governance systems accountable as well, to adjust the percentage rate downward, to build a payment rate that is not extracted. And we in the, so as we meet internationally, we actually have a responsibility to hold those institutions accountable, to begin to, not to eliminate debt, because it's never going to be, you can't eliminate debt in an international finance system, but to reduce the burden that those debts have so that there can be healthy economies within. That's enough.
No, thank you. Let me ask you a question. You mentioned very small local initiatives like the Free Loan Society in the Jewish communities. And I know the organization when it was started just a few 100,000, maybe 20 years ago or something, but now, you know, tens of millions of dollars. And it is circulated in the society. You have the same thing in the Muslim communities, you know, kind of interest-free loans. But how this small, you know, kind of initiative by the religious community can impact the overall debt, the sovereign debt of the country?
Well,
because they're very small.
Okay, so there's nothing that says that religious communities can't extrapolate from being very local within the Muslim community, where you have equivalent kinds of loan societies within the Jewish community. That one can make them national, and one can use those as models. It won't work in every country because you don't necessarily have a Muslim majority, you won't have a Jewish majority. But the models can be extrapolated. The religious communities can come together and put together funds for which their responsibility. Say, don't go to the extractive banks, but rather we in the religious communities will take moral responsibility for making sure that money is recirculated through the community while you were establishing your business, while you were getting out of debt, while you're paying your medical bills. And so that I think that if there's a message that can come from an interfaith world, we can say, we're not exempt from the responsibility of using the resources that we have under our own auspices to begin to address this, not to wait for governments to somehow be repentant, not to wait for the colonial North to somehow say we'll do reparations. That's a long-term political strategy that goes beyond this. Within the religious world, though, we're not exempt. We have resources. We have ways in which we can respond to our communities. We have ways in which we can work around the large multinational banks and build support for those in need on a very real basis. So I don't know if that answers your question, Mohamed, but...
Thank you, I appreciate that. David?
I'll just add to that. I don't know in other countries whether this is common. In the United States, there already is a network of what we call community banks that function this way. And in many communities, the religious community is part of the coalition that's created this nonprofit community bank. And often invest their money with them in order to give them a base there. So, you know, that's another piece of it as well, because if you have to start from scratch, as you know, and build the bank yourself, it's really a daunting thing for few churches or mosques to do on their own. But if you're working with a broad coalition in the community, the religious community can help spur that, can help model investing in it, etc. So.
Great, thank you. Anyone else would like to add here? You know, I was looking into the GDP of South Africa a couple of days ago, and it's very impressive. But still, there's problems in the country, for instance, right? So I want to touch upon the corruption and the impact of corruption on debt. Anyone would like? Yes, please start.
Thank you. That to me unlocks a whole part of the conversation that, and I want to start from my American perspective on this. I think a lot of people don't know that in the United States, our total public debt for the U.S. government is now 122% of our GDP. We're actually the third highest in terms of indebtedness of all high-income countries, behind...
What is it now, $30 trillion? 37 trillion
dollars, yeah. And if you look at the little indicators, it keeps ticking up with each second. And so we're third behind Greece and Japan, and those are not great benchmarks to use. Every low and middle income country in the world averages 60%. If you look at the other high income countries, Europe and other places, they tend to average in the high, maybe 70s or 80s. So they're using debt, they're structuring debt in order to accomplish their economic requirements. We are out of control, so I'm humble whenever I start talking about debt in other places. The question that you've raised, though, is what's the linkage between our behavior? What's the linkage between that desire for debt and the corruption? Because we get addicted to the we get addicted to the corruption. We get addicted to the debt, and we finance a lot of corruption through the debt, because we can bring in $3 billion to do some program or some project, and so we're going to chase that down. That will fund a lot of things the governments want to do, and there will be some extractive process that comes from that. I'm really concerned about that. So when I start thinking about what is debt reform going to look like, at some point we have to think about or imagine a world where we're not dependent on that, and I don't know how to get there. But I do see all of the mechanisms that feed that, where we know the governments, they will go after a multi-billion-dollar loan to finance something in the health sector, but then the funding gets channeled into different things that end up serving specific interests. So that is a concern.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm coming to you, Ambassador.
Do you want some help running the microphone?
No, it's good. Okay, thank you. I need to do my steps this morning anyway. Okay. Yes, go on.
Thank you very much, Moderator, and thanks to the organizers for choosing that topic. I have a simple question.
What does it mean?
what does it mean to have a fishbowl session? But that's what we can have on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one is the choice of the title of this session. I don't think it's random, because there is a clear connection between debt and global governance. And that is why the African Union, African states have asked for a systemic restructuring and adjustment and reform of the global financial system in order for Africa and for the rest of the world to solve the debt problem. And it is very clear that the global financial architecture, in fact the global governance in general, including the Security Council, where Africa is the only continent in the world not represented in the permanent category. So you cannot imagine for the global governance that is shaped that way to produce outputs that are pro-African. And hence the clear demand, the clear position of the African Union to ask for the reform both of the global governance in general and of the global financial institutions in general. And I'm really surprised that no one has actually mentioned that. So the voice of Africa and the demands of Africa and the perspective of Africa should really be present here, because we are not speaking about a global governance that is equitable, that is fair, that is participatory, that is democratic, so that it allows Africa to realize its Agenda 2063 and other development aspirations.
So do you think that now Africa is in the G20 groups? Is that going to answer some of your concerns and African concerns?
It's one step.
It's one step.
It's one step. That is not the end of the journey. It's very, very clear that even Africa within the G20 is asking for the reform of the global architecture. That's global governance.
Thank you so much. All right, anyone, I need hands up because we have 10 minutes to close. Yeah.
I think
20 minutes?
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Oh wow, she's very generous, right? Very generous, yes please.
I think as one looks at the context of the South African situation, we have unfortunately a society where corruption is endemic, if not systemic. And I think the big challenge there is that this nation, and I'm not saying or speaking to any other African nation, but this nation has a serious problem that is simply not being addressed. And as long as there is corruption at that level, where we literally have just about not one municipality that is solvent, that there is just vast amounts of money has been channeled outside of this nation by, or outside of the purposes of this nation, by those who've taken advantage of different positions. We've had endless commissions and nothing has actually changed. I think the problem then is if you say, well, please you'll cancel the debts and just restore the money. The question is, where's that money going to go to? And so I think the challenge would be, for South Africa particularly, but for other African nations too, is clean up your house first. Because if you don't clean up your own internal processes and your own internal structures and accountability, then surely if money just comes rolling back in, it's not going to actually serve the purposes of building the nation, building the infrastructures, serving the citizens of that nation. So it's just going to go back into the same hands of the same people who've been taking it already. So that might be a slightly skeptical view, but I do believe there's a very important component for African governments, particularly South African governments, to get their own house in order.
I completely agree. That's why I mentioned earlier the GDP of South Africa in 2024 was $847 billion. That's 2024, right? The GDP of this country. So you guys have a lot of resources, but we need to address corruption issues, as you said. Please.
Yeah, just along the same line, I agree with him totally,
Yeah.
the issue of corruption, but also the issue of governance.
Yes.
We have many incompetent people being put in key strategic positions. And in some instances, money is stolen because the one who's leading there is incompetent and not good enough to mitigate these corrupt activities. So governance is also important for us in Africa. And not just only South Africa, but I think the whole continent. We need good and capable leaders who will be able to govern in a way that is ethical and also efficient to mitigate these corrupt activities.
Wonderful, got it. Thank you. Any hand in this side of the room? Hazel, you want to do something? Okay. All right. We'll give it to your neighbor, the wife first, and then we'll come back to you. Yes. Yes. He's speaking.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Eric, welcome. Yeah.
I was just going to make a contribution related to corruption and kind of like picking back on one in the panel that was talking on debt, when somebody actually says that there is a lot of money going out regardless of the social situations in terms of help for many people, and so much money that is going towards debt servicing, really ignoring in a way the contextual situation in country as it relates to education, as it relates to health services. And I think that's a paradox. And I think it's also kind of like a corrupt system, as you actually say. And how can we then begin to flip the coin? I think we as faith, we need to be speaking out a bit more in terms of these things that are going on well. I also kind of like really thinking, I think, as Africa, in terms of really having our own thinking and flipping the coin in terms of having and being innovative in how we can actually work on financial institutions that can be beneficial to our own population here on the African continent. I kind of like 50-50 in terms of struggling to reform something which is very high above, which we have been struggling with for years as Africa to try and reform, and really think that we will be able to reform it. I kind of like think that we need to reinvent from within, and I think that as Africa we do have capacity to be able to do that. And I think that should be one of our aspirations, to be able to finance ourselves from within and be able to think, I think, in an innovative way in terms of how we can flip the coin and tackle or take the bull by the horns ourselves, because I think we are working in vain, or kind of like trying to push a square wheel to cut. We need to find the round wheels for us to be able to move.
Great, thank you so much. Rabbi Mark, you have a follow-up here on this one?
If somebody didn't speak yet, they should go first.
Yes, okay. Yes, so give it to my brother here. Yes, I appreciate that. Come
I
on.
think in the context of the G20,
Yeah.
and also its theme, especially as it relates to equality, we cannot ignore the fact that at least for the developing world, which includes Africa, debt has become a form of slavery and colonialization. Those countries that are giving out debt, they give debt in order to control, in order to extract minerals, in order to determine who governs, in order for the governments in those countries basically to be subservient to them. So we cannot ignore the political agenda of giving out debt. And even as we say that these countries are corrupt, the very people that are giving this debt, they give it deliberately, knowing those people are corrupt. Intentionally, whether it's Mobutu in the Congo, I'm sorry to mention, whether it's in Museveni in Uganda, everybody knows they're corrupt. And yet they'll actually pump them with debt. What is their agenda? So that they can control them. And so a decisive decision by the G20 to set the rules. You are not going to give a debt which we call odious debt, a debt that does nothing to that nation, a debt that basically poisons the governance in that nation. If the G20 leadership takes that decision, we can give a debt if it is for development, for fighting poverty, for reducing inequality. It must be an ethical debt, not an unethical, corrupting debt that is intended just nothing else but basically to keep those countries in slavery. Whether it's West Africa or Southern Africa or Latin America, the debt that there's a guy who used to work for the World Bank, John Perkins, who wrote the Confessions of the Economic Hitman. In that book, he deliberately says his job was to go to a country that doesn't need any debt and actually convince them that you need debt. with the intention of simply keeping them in slavery. So this has nothing to do with my debt and so on. It has to do with the global governance. What is the intention of the people that are giving debt? Is it to help or to control?
Thank you so much. I mean, you made an important point, my brother Mohamed. Thank you so much. This is really quite powerful. Anyone would like to follow up with that? You spoke already.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we'll give it a chance here. And Lieber, yeah.
Can I just make a quick request?
Yes.
If you haven't spoken yet, if you could say your name.
Your name, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Mohamed is the one that made just the most important point. Yeah. Yes. Your name and affiliation.
Andrew Bateman, member of the Appropriations Committee in the National Assembly of South Africa. I represent a party which is in government but also quite critical of the previous ruling party. Our debt was at a manageable level in 2008. The government spending ballooned after that. A very corrupt government for many years, and arguably still there's a long way to go. Our procurements, we pay a lot more than what we should for many of our goods and services, and there's an element, a layer of what's arguably corruption in that as well. I think the COVID pandemic was also a major contributor to the ballooning of our debt as well. So corruption, mismanagement, to some degree external circumstances. The question is, when you do get a government that's willing to make steps of reform, will there be some kind of globally backed initiative to make it easier for those countries, if they do meet the necessary criteria to eradicate corruption or to deal with corruption, to deal with mismanagement, to deal with overspending, to use finances responsibly? Will that be met by global initiatives to make it easier for those countries to get out of the situation that they find themselves in? So right now we spend, as a nation, we spend about 22% of the tax revenue that we receive servicing the interest on our national debt. It's only 77% is expected to peak this year of our GDP, which is lower than developed countries, but it's not affordable for us because obviously the servicing costs are much higher because of the risk and the inflation rate. So if there were mechanisms that were in place that said if you do A, B, C, D, and E to get your house in order, then we will do the following to make it easier for your debt servicing costs to come down, that could make a significant difference. And some of those conditions could be that the savings that are generated through the reduced interest rates are used to pay down your debt more quickly, to get yourself into a more sustainable position more quickly. And when you look at the size of the debt in global terms, although it's very high, large numbers from South African perspective, and this is the same with all of the developing nations, for the countries themselves, the debt seems insurmountable. But if you look at it from a global perspective, with the amounts of monies that are flowing around on a global level, it's actually quite manageable.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree, there's no point in putting in place those kinds of debt relief programs if there aren't the reforms and the political will and mandate that's necessary to actually use the savings well. Otherwise, we'll just waste the money that's poured down, throwing good money after bad. There's no point in doing that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Anyone else? Before I get back to Brian. 7 minutes. 7 minutes to go. Yes.
Okay, and since I have to be on the next panel, I'm probably going to have to.
Yes.
So I want to come back to where I started. Last year, I'm going to talk about the G20. Last year, President Lula in Brazil took a very strong position in revising, in getting positions of the G20 to revise the global economic system, to develop a mandatory tax on billionaires, to make sure that multinational corporations pay a minimum tax and are not exempt because of specialized tax privileges around the world. Unfortunately, we can talk about the G20 taking that position, but it was vetoed by several countries. I don't want to mention the one that I come from that played a role in vetoing it, but that was the case. And so that while we can talk about the G20 playing that role, I think sadly, it's a little naive to assume that that's going to come from the G20. However, the reason I started, as I did earlier, pushing that we need to, that the religious communities, which is where we're sitting in this meeting, can play a role, is because when put together, we represent a huge amount of investments. And there's roles that we can play in terms of shareholder activism to hold corporations accountable. There's roles in which, if we understand on a global impact level, the Catholic Church with its 1.5 billion members, and the Greek Orthodox Church with its almost 1 billion members, and the Muslim world with its impact, we can impact the financial system.
The Muslim world with a lot of money and some.
That's what I'm saying. If the religious communities were to decide to act together, to enforce certain moral and ethical standards of lending, of the way we won't be able to change the corruption in places. We can create an alternative reality which builds an ethical standard for economic.
But the problem is that you are off the table. You are not at the table to share this ethical, the ethic that you talk about.
But I don't agree with you, because the fact is that shareholder activism is something that because the big churches and the mosques and the synagogues and in the Eastern world the leaders of the Hindu world represent huge investments that can be played as shareholder activists. They are at the table in that regard. They may not be at the global governance table, but but when we're talking about debt, they're significantly at the table where money is being determined, where values are being determined, where policies are being determined. And if it turns out that it's a slow process, I'm not trying to be naive, Mohamed, don't misunderstand me. But I don't think that, I just want to say that we have some accountability and responsibility ourselves to somehow say we represent a certain degree of power that we can be using to influence the financial system on the international level. Of course, we're not necessarily at those governance tables when the G20 meets, and I know we're not there, but that doesn't exempt us from taking proactive steps that can begin to impact the policies of multinational corporations.
I'm talking about the influence. If you guys, from this conference, you have just come up with half a page of 5 recommendations, we don't even have the channel to put it to the discussion before the G20 leadership. I mean, these are realities. 3 minutes left. So these are realities. So how we gonna do that? Strong recommendations, coming from here, but how we gonna get it there? We don't have influence on those, who are governing the stuff. Okay.
So very quickly, first of all, there is
David.
I think the person.
Never need your name and affiliation.
I think he already has.
He already recorded. Okay.
Yes. So one of the things is that perhaps this is a reflection of exactly what happens when there is debt restructuring and governance of the same in this room. There is a majority, first of all, of men that are discussing it from a very masculine perspective, and we have not had a choice. I don't know whether he's got and this is also reflected in the G20 as well. So it's kind of a systemic change that has got to happen from the ground up. Number 2, about practical recommendations, and I think movements that start from ground up have changed governance in the history. We know about the trade unions and all that. I think as the interfaith, as the IF20 itself, we could start with a mapping of which faith-based organizations are able to offer, and institutions are already offering that and are already offering financial services, and what are their interest rates vis-a-vis those of the secular ones. Because we have cases of very good, strong financial institutions that are offering even higher debt interest compared to the secular banking and financial services sector. Are we out for the same profits? Are we out for the same capitalism, or are we out to help people out of debt? Lastly, in terms of grassroots movements, let's empower the self-help groups. We cannot ignore those small structures that govern things like table banking and so on.
Thank you so much. Very good. Very good. Any closing remarks from anyone from this side of the room? Closing remarks. Oh, we're gonna be 30 seconds early. All right. Going once, going twice.
Well, just if there are folks here who are interested in the corruption issues, but are not familiar with it. You may want to take a look at Transparency International, essentially, that focuses on Africa. As 2 examples of that. And some of the reforms that you were talking about earlier were actually made after the 2000 crisis, debt crisis, and it's aimed at achieving that. Not nearly enough, but it indicates, and it isn't that they haven't had an impact. In other words, debt levels are comparable, but the damage being done from those debt levels is less because of some of the mechanisms that are put in. It shows that if they want to do it, they can. And, you know, it is just as nearly enough at this point, and a long-term effort to build political pressure on the leaders of different countries here to push the international institutions is really indispensable.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and the session is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you.